They laughed at him the moment he spoke. A young mechanic with grease-stained hands and fire in his eyes stood before a small crowd in the workshop. He wasn't rich, he wasn't famous, and he wasn't even old enough to be taken seriously by the veterans around him. But his words were bold, almost unbelievable. "I've built an engine," he declared, "that can run only on water." The room erupted with laughter. Colleagues slapped each other on the back, mocking what they thought was a childish fantasy. How could a boy from a small town claim to have solved what scientists and engineers had chased for decades? Yet, behind his trembling voice was an unshakable conviction. He knew the truth of what he had created, and one day the world would know it too. Before we dive deeper into this powerful story, let me ask you, have you subscribed to Twists of Life? Hit that button now and join us, because stories like this are just the beginning of the journeys that will change the way you see life itself. The workshop echoed with the sound of metal clanging, tools dropping, and laughter that stung more than any insult. Seasoned mechanics pointed at the young man, shaking their heads, mocking his words. "Water is fuel, what's next? Airplanes flying with wind from a fan," one joked. "Kid, engines drink gasoline, not your fantasies," another sneered. The young mechanic lowered his gaze for a moment, his chest tightened, his pride wounded. But then he lifted his head again. His eyes carried a quiet defiance, a flame that mockery couldn't extinguish. They didn't know what he knew. They hadn't seen what he had seen, and while they laughed today, tomorrow would silence them all. Late at night, when the workshop lights were off and the streets were silent, he stayed behind. The young mechanic worked alone, surrounded by scraps of metal, old tools, and a vision that no one else could see. Every bolt tightened, every hose connected, every adjustment made was fueled not by money, not by recognition, but by an unshakable dream. A dream to prove that the impossible could be possible. His friends drifted away, saying he was wasting his youth. His family worried, thinking he was chasing illusions, but in his heart the engine already roared, even if only in his imagination. Belief was all he had, and sometimes belief is stronger than proof. The night was heavy with silence as he poured clear water into the small tank. His hands trembled, not from fear, but from the weight of what this moment meant. The first attempt, nothing. The machine coughed, rattled, then fell silent. The second attempt, smoke, sparks, failure again. But he didn't quit. Hour after hour he adjusted wires, sealed leaks, tightened bolts. His knuckles were bruised, his clothes soaked in sweat, yet his spirit refused to break. And then, a sound. A low rumble, hesitant at first, then steady, alive. The engine, against every doubt and every mockery, began to run. It was not just an invention, it was proof that his dream had breath. For every small victory, there were 10 crushing defeats. The engine would roar to life one night, only to collapse in silence the next morning. Neighbors complained about the noise, his family begged him to give up, and his body grew weary from endless hours bent over metal and wires. Each failure felt like a dagger. Each breakdown whispered the same cruel question. What if they were right? What if it really is impossible? But the young mechanic refused to let despair win. Every mistake was a lesson, every failure a step closer. He knew the path to triumph was paved with broken pieces and sleepless nights, because true breakthroughs are born not in moments of ease, but in the fire of persistence. It was dawn when the miracle happened. The mechanic, exhausted and half asleep, made one last adjustment and turned the key. This time the engine didn't choke. It roared, smooth, steady, powerful. The sound filled the workshop like a heartbeat, strong and undeniable. He stood frozen, eyes wide, hardly daring to believe what he was hearing. Water, just water. The dream that had cost him nights of ridicule and pain was alive before his very eyes. Tears welled up, not because it was finished, but because hope had finally proven itself real. For the first time he knew, this was only the beginning. Word had spread. Curiosity drew the townspeople, skeptics, and even his harshest critics to the dusty workshop. They came not to believe, but to laugh one last time. The young mechanic stood before them, his heart pounding like a drum. On the table sat the engine, small yet defiant, waiting to silence the crowd. "Watch closely," he said, his voice firm, though his hands trembled. He poured water into the tank. The room buzzed with whispers and mocking chuckles. Then he turned the key. For a moment, silence. And then, the engine roared to life, smooth and strong, filling the workshop with the sound of triumph. The laughter stopped, the air grew heavy, and for the first time, the mockers had nothing to say. The engine's hum drowned out every doubt, every insult, every cruel laugh that had once cut him down. Eyes widened, jaws dropped. The same men who ridiculed him now stood frozen, speechless. One mechanic who had called him a fool leaned closer, touching the machine, as if to confirm it was real. Another, once the loudest in mocking, muttered under his breath, "Impossible!" But it wasn't impossible. It was right there before them, alive and undeniable. The young mechanic didn't gloat. He didn't smile with revenge. He simply stood tall, knowing the moment spoke louder than any words he could ever say. For the first time, silence gave him what laughter never could: respect. The crowd pressed closer, unable to believe what their own eyes and ears revealed. Water, plain, clear water, had become the lifeblood of the machine. The pistons moved with precision, the gears spun with power, and the steady rhythm of the engine echoed like destiny being written in real time. No gasoline, no fumes, no fire. Only water. Whispers turned into awe. Neighbors, workers, even strangers from nearby towns who had come to mock now stared as if witnessing a miracle. The young mechanic's hands shook as he touched the machine. This wasn't just an invention anymore. It was proof that faith and perseverance could bend reality itself. And the world, whether it was ready or not, had just changed. By nightfall, the story had already escaped the walls of the workshop. Neighbors told neighbors, whispers turned into tales, and tales became headlines in the small local papers. A boy builds an engine that runs on water. Some called it genius, others called it fraud. But everyone was talking about it. Strangers traveled miles just to see it for themselves. Photographers snapped pictures, reporters scribbled notes, skeptics demanded proof. The young mechanic, once invisible, was now the center of a storm he had never imagined. He didn't seek fame, but fame came knocking anyway, and as the news spread like wildfire, it reached ears he never thought would listen, including one man who had the power to change his life forever. The day was ordinary until a black car rolled quietly up to the workshop. The doors opened, and out stepped a man whose presence commanded silence, the owner of one of the largest car factories in the region. The workers whispered among themselves, stunned. Why would a man of such stature come to this forgotten corner of town? The young mechanic froze as the factory owner walked toward him, eyes sharp yet curious. "I've heard rumors," the man said calmly. "An engine that runs on nothing but water. Show me." The crowd held its breath. This was no longer a game, no longer a local curiosity. The dream of a boy was about to be judged by the very heart of the automobile industry itself. The workshop felt like a stage as the young mechanic prepared the engine before the factory owner's eyes. No laughter this time, no mocking voices, only silence heavy with expectation. He poured water into the tank and turned the key. The engine roared to life, strong and flawless. The owner's face remained unreadable at first, cold, calculating. Then slowly a faint smile appeared. "This," he said, "is no child's trick. This is history." The same men who once mocked now stood behind him, ashamed, their heads bowed. For the first time, respect filled the room, not just for the invention, but for the boy who had never surrendered his dream. Ridicule had birthed recognition, and the young mechanic's life would never be the same. The factory owner stepped closer, his voice low but powerful. "Join me," he said. "Bring this invention to the world. I'll give you the resources, the team, and the reach you need. Together, we can change history." Gasps filled the workshop. The same boy who had been mocked, dismissed, and called a fool was now being courted by one of the most powerful men in the industry. For a moment, the young mechanic stood in disbelief. Every sleepless night, every wound on his hands, every insult he had swallowed, it all led to this single choice. Tears threatened to fall as he nodded, his voice trembling. Yes, let's do it. The workshop erupted, not with laughter this time, but with thunderous applause. Weeks turned into months, and the small workshop gave way to laboratories, factories, and boardrooms. What had once been a humble dream hidden in the shadows was now a project spoken of around the world. The engine was tested, refined, perfected. Scientists marveled, engineers studied, investors lined up. And at the center of it all stood the young mechanic, no longer mocked, no longer ignored, but honored. Every bruise, every scar, every sleepless night had written the story of his triumph. Success had not arrived as a gift, but as the reward for perseverance that refused to die. The boy who once stood alone now stood as a symbol. A living reminder that dreams, when pursued relentlessly, can outlive doubt and silence the world. Years later, people would still speak of the boy who dared to dream. What began as laughter in a dusty workshop became a spark that ignited hope in countless hearts. Children studied his story in schools. Inventors whispered his name as inspiration. And those who once mocked him remembered with shame how quickly they had doubted. The water-powered engine was more than a machine. It became a symbol, proof that faith, courage, and perseverance could bend reality itself. The young mechanic, now a man, often returned to that old workshop. He would stand in the silence, smile softly, and whisper to himself, "They laughed at me once, but I never stopped believing." Before we close this story, let me ask you, have you liked, shared, and subscribed to Twists of Life? Stories like this deserve to reach hearts everywhere, and with your support, they will.